What existed before time began? It's a question that sounds almost childlike in its simplicity, yet it strikes at the very heart of existence itself. Before the first tick of any cosmic clock, before the universe had its first birthday, before there was even a before to speak of what was there darkness? Was there light? Was there simply nothing at all, waiting patiently in some impossible stillness for everything to suddenly burst into being? Tonight, we're going to embark on one of the most mind-bending journeys science has ever attempted. We're going to peer beyond the veil of time itself, into realms where our everyday understanding crumbles like ancient parchment. This isn't just about the Big Bang, though, that Cosmic Fireworks show certainly plays a starring role. This is about something far more mysterious, far more fundamental. We're asking what could possibly exist in a reality where time hasn't even been invented yet. Now, I should warn you up front, this journey might leave you staring at the ceiling tonight, wrestling with concepts that seem to defy every instinct you have about how reality works. But if that happens, well, at least you'll be pondering some of the deepest mysteries the universe has to offer. And honestly, that's not a bad way to spend an evening. Before we dive into this cosmic rabbit hole, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Are you settling in for the night in Stockholm? Or maybe stealing a quiet moment during lunch in Sao Paulo? Drop a comment and let me know there's something beautifully ironic about people from different time zones gathering to discuss what existed before time itself. If you find yourself captivated by these kinds of mind-expanding explorations, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing. It helps more curious souls discover these deep dives into the fundamental nature of reality. And trust me, we're going to need all the curious minds we can get for where we're headed. So, take a comfortable breath, let your shoulders relax, and prepare to have your understanding of existence gently turned upside down. We're about to explore the ultimate before a realm so alien to our experience that even describing it requires us to bend language itself into impossible shapes. Let's begin at what we might call the edge of understanding. Picture, if you will, the moment of the Big Bang. Not the explosion itself that comes later, but the infinitesimal instant that scientists call t equals 0. This isn't just the beginning of space and matter and energy. This is the beginning of time itself. Before this moment, the very concept of before becomes meaningless. It's like asking what's north of the North Pole, or what happened before the first chapter of a book that has no prologue. But here's where things get fascinatingly complex. Modern physics suggests that this t equals 0 might not actually be the true beginning at all. It might simply be the limit of what our current understanding can reach, like standing at the edge of a fog bank, knowing there's something beyond, but unable to see what it is. And in that mysterious fog, in that realm beyond our mathematical reach, lie some of the most profound questions ever contemplated. What could exist in a timeless state? How can we even think about existence without the framework of time to give it structure? These aren't just academic puzzles, they're invitations to expand our very conception of what reality might be. The first thing we need to understand is just how strange the concept of before time really is. In our everyday experience, everything happens in sequence. You wake up, then you brush your teeth, then you have breakfast. Cause follows effect in an orderly procession. Events are strung together like beads on the thread of time, each one leading naturally to the next. But remove time from this picture, and the entire framework collapses. Imagine trying to describe a symphony to someone who has never heard the concept of sequence. How do you explain that one note follows another when there's no following to speak of? How do you describe rhythm without the beat of time to mark it? This is the challenge we face when trying to understand what might exist in a timeless realm. Some of the greatest minds in physics have wrestled with this paradox. Einstein showed us that time isn't the fixed, universal backdrop we once thought it was. Instead, it's woven together with space in a flexible fabric that can stretch, compress, and curve. Near massive objects, time slows down. At high speeds, it dilates. Time, it turns out, is not separate from the universe, it's part of the universe. This revelation opened up extraordinary possibilities. If time is part of the physical universe, then asking what existed before the universe began is like asking what existed before existence began. It's a question that might not have an answer, at least not in any way we can currently comprehend. But physics doesn't stop at the comfortable boundaries of comprehension. It pushes forward into territories where intuition fails and mathematics becomes our only guide. And in these strange territories, some remarkable ideas have emerged. One of the most intriguing concepts comes from quantum mechanics, that bizarre realm where particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously, where observation changes reality, and where the very act of measurement seems to create the properties it's measuring. In the quantum world, the normal rules of cause and effect become suggestions rather than laws. Quantum mechanics suggests that at the smallest scales of reality, time itself might not be smooth and continuous as we experience it. Instead, it might be granular, made up of discrete units so small that our everyday experience of flowing time emerges only as an average, like the way the smooth surface of a lake emerges from countless individual water molecules. If time is made of discrete units, quantum time, if you will, then perhaps the question of what existed before time began takes on new meaning. Perhaps there are realms of reality that exist outside this granular time structure entirely. Perhaps there are modes of existence that don't require the sequential unfolding we call temporal flow. This brings us to one of the most mind-bending ideas in modern cosmology, the concept of eternal inflation. Picture the Big Bang not as a single event, but as one bubble in an endless foam of creation. In this view, our entire observable universe with its billions of galaxies, its 13.8 billion years of history, its countless stars and planets is just one small bubble in an infinite sea of other universes, each with its own space, its own time, its own physical laws. But here's the truly staggering part. This eternal inflation might not have had a beginning. It might have been going on forever, spawning universe after universe in an endless cascade of creation. In this scenario, time doesn't have a beginning because there are always more universes being born, always new timelines branching off from the eternal creative process. Yet even this extraordinary vision leaves us with profound questions. If eternal inflation is timeless in the sense of having no beginning, it still involves process, change, creation. Universes still bubble into existence in some kind of sequence. There's still a framework of causation, even if it extends infinitely in all directions. So, we're still left wondering, what is the nature of the reality that allows this eternal process to unfold? Here's where we encounter one of the deepest puzzles in all of physics and philosophy, the relationship between being and becoming. Our everyday experience is dominated by becoming, by change, by the flow of time, by the transformation of one moment into the next. But many of the deepest theories in physics point toward a more fundamental level of reality where being might be more primary than becoming. Consider this carefully. When we ask what existed before time began, we're still thinking in terms of existence as something that happens within time. We imagine a state of affairs, a condition, a situation that persisted before time started ticking. But what if existence itself doesn't require time? What if there are modes of being that are simply there, not in any temporal sense, but in a way that transcends the entire framework of before and after? This isn't just philosophical speculation, it emerges naturally from some of our most successful physical theories. In general relativity, for instance, the entire history of the universe can be viewed as a four-dimensional block where past, present, and future all exist simultaneously. From this perspective, time doesn't flow, it simply is. The entire timeline of the universe, from the Big Bang to the heat death, exists as a complete eternal structure. If this block universe view is correct, then asking what existed before time began is like asking what exists outside the pages of a book. The question assumes a perspective that doesn't actually exist within the system being described. Time, in this view, doesn't begin or end, it's simply one dimension of a larger, timeless reality. But even this perspective leaves us with the ultimate question: what is the nature of this larger reality? What allows the four-dimensional block of space-time to exist at all? Here we brush up against the limits of scientific inquiry and enter territory that has traditionally been the domain of philosophy and theology. Some theoretical physicists have proposed that mathematics itself might be the foundation of reality. In this view, the universe isn't made of matter or energy or space-time, it's made of mathematical relationships. The patterns and structures that we perceive as physical reality are actually mathematical truths playing out in some abstract realm of pure form. If this mathematical universe hypothesis is correct, then the question of what existed before time began has a surprisingly elegant answer. Mathematical truth existed, not in time, not in space, but in the timeless realm of abstract necessity. The mathematical relationships that govern the behavior of particles and forces and fields existed as eternal truths, waiting to be instantiated in physical reality. But this raises its own profound mysteries. How do abstract mathematical relationships give rise to concrete physical experience? How does the equation become the thing? How does mathematical necessity translate into the warmth of sunlight on your skin or the taste of coffee on a winter morning? These questions push us to the very edge of what human reason can grasp. We find ourselves in the strange position of using concepts developed within time to think about timeless realities, using language evolved for temporal experience to describe eternal truths, using minds that exist in sequence to contemplate simultaneity. Perhaps this is the deepest lesson of our inquiry so far. The question of what existed before time began reveals not just the mystery of cosmic origins, but the mystery of consciousness itself. We are temporal beings trying to understand timeless realities, finite minds grappling with infinite concepts, creatures of sequence attempting to comprehend simultaneity. And yet, remarkably, we can make progress. Through mathematics, through careful reasoning, through the patient accumulation of evidence, and the bold construction of theories, we can glimpse something of what lies beyond the boundaries of time. We can't fully comprehend it, our minds may simply lack the capacity, but we can point toward it, gesture in its direction, construct models that capture something of its nature. This is perhaps what's most beautiful about the human quest to understand existence. We are compelled to ask questions that we may never be able to fully answer, yet in the asking, in the patient exploration of mystery, we touch something profound about the nature of reality and our place within it. The realm before time began may forever remain partially veiled from human understanding, but our ability to even conceive of such a realm, to construct theories about it, to glimpse its mathematical shadows, this itself is a kind of miracle. We are pattern-seeking creatures in a universe full of patterns, temporal beings with the capacity to think about timelessness, finite minds that can contemplate infinity. As we continue our journey into these deep waters, we'll explore more of what modern physics has discovered about the nature of time, the structure of reality, and the possible answers to our ultimate question. We'll encounter quantum fluctuations and vacuum states, eternal inflation and the multiverse, the role of consciousness and the mystery of mathematical truth. But for now, let's pause and appreciate the magnitude of what we're attempting. We're trying to understand existence itself, not just how things work, but why there's anything at all. We're probing the foundations of reality with instruments made of matter and minds made of pattern and time. In this strange dance between the known and unknowable, we encounter what might be the most counterintuitive concept in all of physics, the quantum vacuum. Now, when most people hear the word vacuum, they think of empty space, a region where nothing exists, where all matter and energy have been removed. But quantum mechanics tells us a very different story about what nothing really means. The quantum vacuum isn't empty at all. It's a seething, bubbling foam of activity, where particles and antiparticles constantly pop into existence and annihilate each other in timescales so brief that they exist below the threshold of direct observation. These are called virtual particles, and they're not just theoretical constructs. Their effects can be measured in laboratories around the world. Picture space itself as a calm lake on a windless day. From a distance, the surface appears perfectly smooth, perfectly still. But get close enough, look carefully enough, and you'll see tiny ripples, microscopic disturbances that never quite settle into absolute stillness. The quantum vacuum is similar. It appears empty on large scales, but zoom in to the smallest possible level, and you discover a constant dance of creation and destruction. This quantum foam operates according to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which tells us that energy and time are linked in a fundamental way. The principle allows the universe to borrow energy from nowhere, as long as it pays it back quickly enough. The smaller the amount of energy borrowed, the longer it can exist. The larger the amount, the more quickly it must be returned to the cosmic bank. What makes this relevant to our question about what existed before time began is that these quantum fluctuations might not require time in the way we normally understand it. They exist in a realm where the normal rules of causation become fuzzy, where effects can precede their causes, where the very notion of sequence breaks down into probability and potential. Some physicists have proposed that our entire universe might have emerged from just such a quantum fluctuation, not within time, but as time itself. In this view, the Big Bang wasn't an explosion that happened at a particular moment, but rather the moment when time itself crystallized out of a timeless quantum foam. Space, time, matter, and energy all emerged together as different aspects of a single quantum event. But this raises an even deeper question. What allows the quantum vacuum to exist at all? What provides the stage on which these virtual particles can perform their brief dance of existence and annihilation? Here we encounter what physicists call the problem of the ground state, the question of what constitutes the most fundamental level of reality. In quantum field theory, every field has a ground state, a lowest possible energy configuration. But even this ground state isn't truly empty. It's filled with zero-point energy, a kind of irreducible background hum that permeates all of space. This zero-point energy might be what allows quantum fluctuations to occur in the first place. It's the canvas on which the artwork of virtual particles is painted. Yet we can push the question back even further. What determines the properties of this ground state? What sets the values of the fundamental constants that govern how quantum fields behave? Why does zero-point energy have the precise characteristics that allow universes like ours to emerge from quantum fluctuations? These questions lead us into some of the most speculative territories of modern physics. One possibility is that the properties of the quantum vacuum aren't fixed at all, but vary across different regions of some larger reality. Perhaps there's a vast landscape of possible vacuum states, each with different physical laws, different fundamental constants, different capacities for giving birth to universes. This landscape of possibilities might be truly infinite, containing every conceivable variation of physical reality. In such a multiverse, our universe would be just one possibility among countless others, one particular combination of physical laws that happen to be compatible with the emergence of complexity, life, and consciousness. But even this vast multiverse landscape requires something to exist within. What provides the framework for this infinite variety of possible realities? What allows the landscape itself to be there, waiting to be explored by spontaneous quantum events? Here we approach what might be the ultimate boundary of scientific inquiry. Science excels at explaining how things work, at tracing the relationships between different phenomena, at predicting what will happen under various conditions. But when we ask why anything exists at all, we're asking a question that might transcend the methods and concepts of science itself. Consider the deepest level at which science operates. It describes patterns, relationships, mathematical structures that govern how reality behaves. But patterns and relationships seem to require something to be patterned, something to be related. Mathematics describes the rules of the game, but what provides the board on which the game is played? Some philosophers and physicists have suggested that the question itself might be based on a false assumption. Perhaps the idea that something needs to come from something else is a prejudice born from our experience within time, where we see constant sequences of cause and effect. Perhaps at the deepest level, existence simply is, without requiring any external source or foundation. This perspective suggests that the question, what existed before time began, is like asking, what is the color of Wednesday? Or what does the square root of justice taste like? It's not that these questions are too difficult to answer, it's that they represent category errors, attempts to apply concepts outside their natural domain. But there's another possibility, one that's both more humble and more profound. Perhaps the reason we can ask questions that seem to transcend our own existence is that consciousness itself partakes in something beyond the temporal realm we inhabit. Perhaps the part of us that can contemplate timeless mathematical truths, that can imagine infinity, that can wonder about existence itself, is somehow connected to the timeless reality we're trying to understand. This isn't necessarily a mystical claim, it could be understood in purely naturalistic terms. If consciousness emerges from complex patterns of information processing, and if the universe is fundamentally made of information and pattern, then consciousness might be the universe's way of knowing itself. When we contemplate what existed before time began, we might be participating in reality's own self-reflection. The ancient Greek philosopher Plotinus spoke of consciousness as a kind of mirror in which the eternal contemplates itself. Modern information theory suggests something similar, that consciousness might be what happens when patterns of information become complex enough to model themselves, to represent their own structure within their own processing. If this view is correct, then our inquiry into what existed before time began isn't just an academic exercise. It's reality exploring its own deepest nature through the questions that conscious beings are capable of asking. We're not external observers trying to peer into a mystery that has nothing to do with us. We're part of the mystery itself, using our capacity for wonder and reasoning to illuminate the nature of our own existence. This brings us to a fascinating paradox. The tools we use to investigate timeless reality logic, mathematics, consciousness itself seem to operate according to principles that transcend the temporal flow in which we're embedded. When you grasp a mathematical truth, like the fact that the square root of 2 is irrational, you're apprehending something that doesn't depend on when you think it, where you are, or how the universe happens to be configured at that moment. Mathematical truths seem to exist in a realm that's neither spatial nor temporal in the ordinary sense. They don't change over time. The Pythagorean theorem was as true before Pythagoras discovered it as it is today. They don't exist in particular places. The number pi is the same ratio whether you're calculating it on Earth or in the Andromeda galaxy. This mathematical realm might offer us a clue about what could exist before time began. Perhaps the most fundamental level of reality consists of eternal mathematical relationships, logical necessities that exist outside the framework of space and time altogether. In this view, physical reality as we know it, with its particles and forces, its expansion and evolution, would be the temporal unfolding of timeless mathematical truths. But even mathematical existence raises profound questions. What makes a mathematical statement true rather than false? What determines which mathematical structures get instantiated in physical reality and which remain abstract possibilities? Why is the universe mathematical at all? The great physicist Eugene Wigner once wrote about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the natural sciences. It's remarkable that abstract mathematical concepts, developed purely through logical reasoning, turn out to describe the behavior of the physical world with such extraordinary precision. This effectiveness is so striking that it seems to call for an explanation. One possibility is that mathematics is effective in describing nature because nature is mathematics. Not that mathematical equations describe reality, but that mathematical relationships constitute reality at its deepest level. In this view, asking what existed before time began is like asking what mathematical truths were true before the universe began calculating them. Yet even this mathematical perspective on reality leaves us with the deepest question of all: why is there something rather than nothing? Even if reality consists of mathematical relationships, even if the physical universe is the temporal expression of eternal logical truths, we're still left wondering why there should be any such thing as logical truth at all. This question might mark the absolute boundary of rational inquiry. Every explanation we can give for why something exists seems to presuppose the existence of something else. Physical laws, mathematical relationships, logical principles, or explanatory frameworks themselves. At some point, we seem to encounter what philosophers call the brute fact of existence itself. But perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Perhaps the mystery of existence is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be celebrated. The fact that we can ask these questions, that we can wonder about timeless realms while embedded in time, that we can contemplate infinity while being finite, this itself is part of what makes existence so extraordinary. We are pattern-recognizing beings in a universe full of patterns, temporal creatures with the capacity to think about eternity, finite minds that can gesture toward infinity. Our very ability to wonder about what existed before time began is itself a kind of miracle, a flowering of complexity and consciousness from the mysterious ground of being that we're trying to understand. And perhaps that's the most profound insight we can reach. The question and the questioner are part of the same reality. When we ask what existed before time began, we're not standing outside existence looking in, we're existence looking at itself. Reality exploring its own deepest nature through the questions that conscious beings are capable of formulating. This recursive nature of consciousness, investigating consciousness, of existence, exploring existence, suggests that our inquiry might be more than just intellectual curiosity. It might be reality's way of coming to know itself, of understanding its own deepest nature through the minds it has brought into being. In this endless dance of self-discovery, we encounter something that physicists call the measurement problem, though it's really much more than a technical puzzle about quantum mechanics. It's a window into the deepest mystery of how reality constructs itself moment by moment. Here's what's strange. In the quantum realm, particles don't have definite properties until they're observed. An electron doesn't have a specific position or momentum until something measures it. Before measurement, it exists in what's called a superposition, a ghostly combination of all possible states simultaneously. But the moment observation occurs, this fuzzy cloud of possibilities collapses into a single definite reality. This isn't just philosophical speculation, it's been confirmed by countless experiments. The act of observation genuinely seems to play a role in determining what becomes real. But here's the puzzle that keeps physicists awake at night. What counts as observation? Does it require a conscious observer? Or is any interaction between quantum systems sufficient? And if consciousness plays a role in collapsing quantum possibilities into definite realities, what does that tell us about the relationship between mind and the fundamental structure of existence? Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that consciousness isn't just along for the ride in the universe, it's actively participating in the creation of reality. In this view, the boundary between observer and observed becomes blurred in the most profound way imaginable. We're not just studying reality from the outside, we're helping to create it through the very act of observation. This leads us to an extraordinary possibility. Perhaps what existed before time began wasn't a thing or a state or a condition, but rather pure potential infinite possibility waiting to be actualized through observation, through consciousness, through the universe's capacity to know itself. Think about it this way. Before any measurement occurs, quantum systems exist in superposition not as definite entities, but as pure potential. They're neither here nor there, neither spinning up nor spinning down, neither existing nor not existing in any classical sense. They simply are potential, waiting to become actual. Now, extrapolate this idea to the ultimate scale. Perhaps what existed before time began was something like a cosmic superposition, infinite potential containing every possible universe, every possible timeline, every possible way that existence could unfold. Not nothing, but everything at once, waiting for some kind of cosmic observation to collapse it into the specific reality we inhabit. But who or what could serve as the observer for such a cosmic collapse? Here we encounter what might be the most mind-bending possibility of all. Perhaps consciousness itself, in some form, is as fundamental to reality as space and time. Perhaps the capacity for observation, for experience, for awareness, exists at the very foundation of what is. This isn't necessarily a return to ancient animism or mysticism, though it might share some surprising parallels with those traditions. It could be understood in perfectly naturalistic terms. Information theory tells us that consciousness is intimately related to information processing. Quantum mechanics tells us that information is fundamental to physical reality. Perhaps consciousness and physical reality are two aspects of the same underlying information, theoretic foundation. In this view, what existed before time began might have been something like pure awareness, not the personal biographical consciousness that you experience as yourself, but awareness as a fundamental feature of reality, the universe's capacity to register information about itself. But let's step back from these speculative heights and consider another possibility that emerges from our best current theories. What if the question of what existed before time began is like asking what happened before the first page of an infinitely long book? Perhaps time doesn't have a beginning because it extends infinitely, in both directions, past and future, stretching without end. This idea of eternal time might seem to contradict what we know about the Big Bang, but it doesn't necessarily. The Big Bang might not have been the beginning of time, but rather a phase transition, a moment when time itself underwent a dramatic transformation, like water changing into steam. Before this transition, time might have existed in a very different form, perhaps flowing according to different rules, perhaps structured in ways we can barely imagine. Some versions of string theory suggest exactly this possibility. In these models, our Big Bang was preceded by a contracting phase, where the universe was shrinking rather than expanding. At the moment of maximum contraction, quantum effects would have caused a bounce, reversing the contraction into the expansion we observe today. In such a cyclic cosmology, time extends infinitely into the past and future, with each cycle bringing its own version of space, matter, and physical laws. But even if time is eternal, we're still left with the question of what sustains it. What allows an infinite timeline to exist at all? What provides the framework within which these cosmic cycles can unfold? We seem to be pushed back to the same fundamental mystery. Why is there anything rather than nothing? Perhaps the answer lies in recognizing that this question itself might be based on a false assumption. We're accustomed to thinking that existence requires some kind of cause or explanation, that things don't just exist for no reason. But this intuition is based on our experience within time, where we see constant chains of cause and effect. Perhaps at the deepest level of reality, existence simply is its own reason, its own cause, its own explanation. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote, "Not how the world is, but that it is the mystery." Perhaps he was pointing towards something profound. The fact of existence itself might be the irreducible foundation from which all other questions spring. We can ask how reality works, how it evolved, how it gives rise to complexity and consciousness. But the question of why it exists at all might not have an answer because it presupposes a framework of causation that doesn't apply to existence itself. Yet there's another possibility that deserves our consideration, one that bridges the scientific and the philosophical in unexpected ways. What if reality has the structure it does because consciousness, in some form, is necessary for existence itself? What if the universe requires observers not just to collapse quantum states, but to exist at all? This idea has roots in both quantum mechanics and information theory. If reality is fundamentally informational, and if information requires something to process it, then perhaps consciousness broadly understood as the capacity to process information is as fundamental as matter and energy themselves. In this view, what existed before time began might have been something like proto-consciousness, not awareness as we experience it, but the abstract capacity for experience itself. Time, space, matter, and energy would then be the structures through which this fundamental awareness expresses itself, the means by which existence becomes conscious of its own nature. But we must be careful not to anthropomorphize this idea. When we speak of fundamental consciousness, we're not talking about a cosmic person with thoughts and feelings and intentions. We're pointing towards something much more abstract, the bare capacity for registration, for information to make a difference, for patterns to be recognized and processed. Think of it as the difference between the experience of seeing the color red and the abstract capacity for wavelengths of light to be registered as meaningful information. The experience is personal, temporal, embedded in the biological structures of human consciousness. The capacity is something more fundamental, the basic feature of reality that allows information to be information rather than just meaningless pattern. This fundamental capacity for information processing might be what allows anything to exist at all. Without some basic capacity for registration, for differences to make a difference, the universe would be not just unobserved, but unobservable in principle, a reality without any internal structure or relationship, an existence that would be indistinguishable from non-existence. From this perspective, asking what existed before time began is like asking what allowed existence to be existence rather than non-existence. And the answer might be the fundamental capacity for information to be meaningful, for patterns to be recognized, for differences to make a difference. Not consciousness as we experience it, but consciousness as the basic feature of reality that makes experience possible. Yet even this informational approach to existence leaves us with profound mysteries. What determines which patterns are meaningful? What allows information to be information rather than just arbitrary arrangement? Why should the universe be structured in such a way that consciousness can emerge from it? These questions push us toward what might be the deepest insight of our entire inquiry. Perhaps the mystery of what existed before time began isn't a problem to be solved, but a pointer toward the inexhaustible depth of existence itself. Perhaps the fact that we can ask this question, that we can wonder about timeless realities while embedded in time, is itself a clue to the nature of what we're trying to understand. Every attempt to explain existence seems to presuppose something else: physical laws, mathematical relationships, informational capacities, or consciousness itself. At some point we seem to encounter what can only be called the sheer givenness of existence, the brute fact that there is something rather than nothing. But maybe that's exactly right. Maybe the mystery isn't a deficiency in our understanding, but a pointer toward the inexhaustible richness of reality itself. Maybe existence is mysterious not because we haven't figured it out yet, but because mystery is woven into the very fabric of what is. Consider this. If existence could be completely explained, completely understood, completely mapped by finite minds, what would that say about its nature? It would suggest that reality is ultimately reducible to concepts that fit within the boundaries of human reason. But perhaps reality is richer than that. Perhaps it exceeds our categories not because we're not smart enough, but because it's genuinely inexhaustible. This doesn't mean we should abandon the quest for understanding. On the contrary, it means that the quest itself is inexhaustible, that there will always be new depths to explore, new questions to ask, new mysteries to contemplate. The fact that we can push our understanding to the very edge of the conceivable to questions about what existed before time began is itself a testament to both the power of human reason and the depth of the reality we're embedded within. And perhaps that's the most profound answer we can reach. What existed before time began might not be a what at all, but a that, the irreducible fact of existence itself, the mysterious ground from which all questions and all questioners emerge, not a thing or a state or a condition, but the sheer givenness of being that allows anything to be at all. When we ask this ultimate question, we're not just exercising intellectual curiosity. We're participating in existence's exploration of its own nature, reality's investigation of its own deepest foundations. The question and the questioner are both expressions of the same mysterious ground we're trying to understand. This recursive quality existence, investigating existence, being exploring being, might be the closest we can come to understanding what transcends the boundary of time itself. Not through finding a final answer, but through recognizing that the capacity to ask the question is itself a manifestation of whatever reality ultimately is. In the end, perhaps what existed before time began is not separate from what exists now, not separate from the consciousness that can wonder about it, not separate from the reality that includes both the question and the search for answers. Perhaps it's the timeless ground of being that expresses itself temporally as the universe we inhabit, spatially as the cosmos we explore, and consciously as the minds capable of asking why there's anything at all. As we venture deeper into this labyrinth of existence, we encounter something that might seem paradoxical. The more we understand about the nature of time, the more mysterious it becomes. It's as if each answer we uncover reveals 3 new questions hiding in its shadow, each more profound than the last. Let's consider for a moment the strange relationship between mathematics and physical reality. When Einstein developed his equations for general relativity, he wasn't trying to describe how the universe actually works. He was exploring the logical consequences of certain mathematical assumptions. Yet these abstract mathematical explorations turned out to predict phenomena that weren't discovered until decades later. Black holes, gravitational waves, the expansion of space itself. This raises a fascinating question. Was Einstein discovering mathematical truths that were already there, waiting to be found? Or was he creating new mathematical structures that happened to match reality? The distinction might seem academic, but it points towards something profound about the relationship between abstract reasoning and concrete existence. If mathematical truths exist independently of human minds, if the relationship between circles and their circumferences was true before any mathematician calculated pi, then perhaps we've stumbled onto something that transcends the temporal framework entirely. Mathematical relationships don't seem to exist in time in the way that physical objects do. The theorem you proved today was just as true yesterday, and it will remain true long after our sun has burned out and our galaxy has drifted apart. This timeless quality of mathematical truth offers us another lens through which to examine our central question. Perhaps what existed before time began wasn't a physical state or condition, but something more akin to the realm of mathematical possibility, not equations written on cosmic blackboards, but the abstract logical structures that make mathematical reasoning possible at all. But here we encounter yet another puzzle. Mathematical structures seem to require relationships, and relationships seem to require something to be related. You can't have the abstract concept of betweenness without things that can be between other things. You can't have numerical relationships without some notion of discrete units that can be counted. Even the most abstract mathematical concepts seem to presuppose a framework of logical possibility that allows them to be coherent. So we're led to ask, What provides this framework? What makes logical coherence possible? What allows mathematical truths to be true, rather than simply arbitrary arrangements of symbols? Some philosophers have suggested that logical necessity itself might be the most fundamental feature of reality, more basic than space, more basic than time, more basic even than existence in any ordinary sense. In this view, what existed before time began was something like the principle of non-contradiction, the logical requirement that something cannot both be and not be in the same sense at the same time. This logical principle seems to operate outside of time entirely. It's not that the principle of non-contradiction was true yesterday and might be false tomorrow. It's that this principle provides the very framework within which concepts like yesterday and tomorrow become meaningful in the first place. But even logical necessity raises its own mysteries. Why should reality be logical at all? Why should the universe be comprehensible to rational thought? Why should mathematical reasoning give us insight into the nature of physical processes? These questions lead us into territory that's been explored by some of the most adventurous thinkers in theoretical physics. Consider the anthropic principle, the observation that the fundamental constants of nature seem to be fine-tuned with extraordinary precision to allow for the existence of complexity, life, and consciousness. Change the strength of the strong nuclear force by just a few %, and stars couldn't form. Adjust the mass of the electron slightly, and chemistry as we know it would be impossible. Tweak the rate of cosmic expansion, and galaxies would either collapse too quickly or expand too rapidly for planets to form. The universe appears to be balanced on a knife's edge of possibility. This fine-tuning is so remarkable that it demands explanation. One possibility is that there are countless other universes with different physical constants, and we happen to find ourselves in one of the rare universes where consciousness can emerge to observe the fine-tuning. This is the multiverse hypothesis we touched on earlier, the idea that our reality is just one bubble in an infinite foam of possibilities. But there's another possibility that's even more intriguing. Perhaps the universe is fine-tuned for consciousness, because consciousness plays a fundamental role in the existence of the universe itself. Perhaps the capacity for observation, for experience, for awareness, is not an accidental byproduct of complex chemistry, but one of the basic features that allows reality to be real. This idea connects to some of the deepest puzzles in quantum mechanics. The measurement problem we discussed earlier isn't just a technical difficulty. It's a window into the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. If observation genuinely plays a role in determining which possibilities become actual, then consciousness isn't separate from the physical universe. It's part of the mechanism by which the universe constructs itself. Now, imagine extending this idea to the ultimate scale. Perhaps what existed before time began was pure potential, not the potential for specific things to happen, but the potential for potentiality itself. The abstract capacity for possibilities to be possible, for relationships to be relatable, for consciousness to be conscious. This wouldn't be consciousness as you experience it, the stream of thoughts and sensations and memories that constitute your personal awareness. It would be something much more fundamental. The bare capacity for experience itself, the abstract possibility of there being something it's like to be something. From this perspective, time, space, matter, and energy would be the structures through which this fundamental capacity expresses itself. Physical reality would be consciousness, knowing itself through the medium of space-time, awareness exploring its own nature through the dance of particles and forces. But we must be careful not to make this sound simpler than it is. We're not talking about a cosmic mind with intentions and plans. We're pointing towards something much more abstract, the basic feature of reality that allows information to be meaningful rather than just arbitrary pattern, that allows differences to make a difference, that allows there to be something rather than nothing. This brings us to one of the most profound insights of information theory. Information and consciousness seem to be intimately connected. Information isn't just data sitting passively in storage. Information is data that makes a difference, to something capable of processing it. Without some capacity for registration, for recognition, for response, there would be no information, just meaningless pattern. Perhaps this is what allows existence to exist at all. The fundamental capacity for patterns to be meaningful, for differences to matter, for information to be information rather than just arbitrary arrangement. Not consciousness as we experience it, but the abstract possibility of experience itself. This abstract capacity wouldn't exist in time because it would be what allows time to be temporal rather than just another static dimension. It wouldn't exist in space because it would be what allows space to be spatial rather than just mathematical abstraction. It wouldn't be material because it would be what allows matter to matter rather than just exist as inert substance. Yet, even this informational approach leaves us with the deepest question of all. Why should there be any capacity for meaning at all? Why should differences be able to make a difference? Why should the universe be structured in such a way that consciousness, even in this abstract sense, is possible? Here we approach what might be the absolute boundary of rational inquiry. Every explanation we can give seems to presuppose some framework of intelligibility, some context within which explanations make sense. But the question of why there should be any such framework at all might transcend the very notion of explanation. Perhaps this is where we encounter what can only be called the mystery of existence itself, not as a problem to be solved, but as the inexhaustible depth from which all problems and solutions emerge. The fact that we can ask about what existed before time began might be the deepest clue we have to the nature of what we're trying to understand. Consider the recursive quality of our inquiry. We are using consciousness to investigate consciousness, employing reason to examine the foundations of reason, applying logic to understand what makes logic possible. We are existence exploring its own nature through the questions that conscious beings are capable of formulating. This isn't a flaw in our method, it's a window into the deepest structure of reality. The fact that consciousness can investigate its own foundations suggests that consciousness isn't separate from those foundations. The fact that reason can examine its own presuppositions suggests that reason participates in whatever makes reasoning possible. Perhaps what existed before time began isn't separate from what exists now. Perhaps it's the timeless ground of being that expresses itself temporally as the universe we inhabit, spatially as the cosmos we explore, rationally as the logic we employ, and consciously as the minds capable of asking why there's anything at all. This doesn't mean we've solved the mystery. If anything, we've deepened it. But perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Perhaps mystery isn't a sign that we haven't understood enough. Perhaps it's a sign that reality is genuinely inexhaustible, that there will always be new depths to explore, new questions to ask, new frontiers of wonder to contemplate. The ancient Greek philosophers spoke of wonder as the beginning of wisdom. Perhaps they were pointing toward something profound, the capacity to be astonished by existence, to be puzzled by the sheer fact that there's something rather than nothing, is itself one of the most remarkable features of reality. When we ask what existed before time began, we're not just exercising intellectual curiosity, we're participating in wonder itself, the mysterious capacity for existence to be amazed by its own nature. The question arises from the same ground we're trying to understand. And perhaps that's the deepest answer we can reach. The questioner and the questioned are expressions of the same inexhaustible mystery. This recursive quality, wonder, wondering about wonder, being investigating being might be as close as we can come to understanding what transcends the boundary of time itself. Not through finding a final answer that closes off all further questions, but through recognizing that the capacity to ask ultimate questions is itself a manifestation of whatever ultimate reality is. In this light, every moment of genuine wonder becomes a kind of revelation. When you lie awake at night contemplating the vastness of space, when you're struck by the improbable fact of your own consciousness, when you feel that peculiar vertigo that comes from thinking about thinking itself in these moments, you're not just having thoughts about reality, your reality having thoughts about itself. The boundary between the observer and the observed dissolves, not into confusion, but into a deeper kind of clarity. You are not separate from the mystery you're contemplating. You are the mystery contemplating itself, existence exploring its own inexhaustible nature through the questions that only conscious beings can ask. And perhaps that's what makes this inquiry so compelling, so urgent, so strangely comforting, even in its ultimate mysteriousness. We're not trying to solve a puzzle that has nothing to do with us. We're trying to understand the nature of the reality that includes us, that made us possible, that expresses itself through our capacity for wonder and reasoning and love. What if we've been approaching this entire question backwards? What if asking what existed before time began is like asking what color Wednesday smells like, not because it's too difficult to answer, but because the question itself emerges from assumptions that don't apply to the reality we're trying to understand? Consider this carefully. When we ask what existed before time began, we're still thinking in terms of existence as something that unfolds in sequence. We imagine a state, a condition, a situation that persisted before the cosmic clock started ticking. But what if existence itself doesn't require the framework of temporal sequence that we're so accustomed to? This brings us to one of the most counterintuitive insights of modern physics, the distinction between time as we experience it and time as it actually behaves at the quantum level. In our everyday world, time flows smoothly from past to future, like a river carrying us inexorably downstream. But zoom into the smallest scales of reality, and this smooth flow breaks down into something far stranger. At the quantum level, time appears to be granular, made up of discrete units so tiny that our experience of flowing time emerges only as a kind of average, like the way a smooth photograph emerges from millions of individual pixels. These quantum moments might be as fundamental to reality as particles and forces, suggesting that time itself is constructed from something more basic. But here's where it gets truly mind-bending. If time is built from discrete quantum moments, then perhaps there are aspects of reality that exist between these moments, in the gaps where time hasn't yet crystallized into the sequential flow we experience, not before time in any temporal sense, but outside the granular structure of time altogether. Think of it like this. Imagine reality as a vast musical composition. We experience it as melody, one note following another in temporal sequence. But the complete composition exists as a whole, with all notes simultaneously present in the score. From this perspective, asking what existed before the music began is like asking what existed before the first note of a symphony that contains all possible notes simultaneously. This musical analogy points towards something profound about the nature of existence itself. Perhaps what we call the beginning of time isn't the start of a temporal sequence, but rather the moment when timeless reality begins to express itself sequentially. Like a symphony that exists complete and eternal in some abstract realm, but unfolds note by note when performed in the temporal world. But this raises its own extraordinary questions. What allows this timeless composition to exist at all? What provides the score on which the notes of reality are written? Here we encounter what might be the deepest insight of our entire inquiry. Perhaps the fundamental nature of existence is neither temporal nor spatial, but something more akin to what mathematicians call a formal system. A formal system is a collection of symbols and rules for manipulating those symbols. It doesn't exist in space or time in any ordinary sense. It's purely abstract, purely logical. Yet from these abstract rules, incredibly complex structures can emerge. The entire edifice of mathematics springs from such formal systems, giving us insights into everything from the behavior of subatomic particles to the evolution of galaxies. Now imagine that reality itself is something like a formal system, not equations on a blackboard, but the abstract logical structure that makes mathematical reasoning possible at all. In this view, Physical reality would be what happens when this abstract logical structure begins to compute itself, to explore its own implications and possibilities. Time would emerge as the sequential unfolding of this cosmic computation. Space would be the arena within which the computation takes place. Matter and energy would be the information being processed. And consciousness would be what happens when the computation becomes complex enough to model itself, to represent its own structure within its own processing. From this perspective, asking what existed before time began is like asking what existed before a mathematical proof began proving itself. The proof exists as a timeless logical structure, but it unfolds step by step when someone works through its implications. Similarly, reality might exist as a timeless formal system that unfolds sequentially as the universe we experience. But even this computational view of reality pushes us toward the ultimate mystery. Why should there be any formal systems at all? Why should logical structure exist rather than logical chaos? Why should the universe be comprehensible to mathematical reasoning? These questions lead us into territory that's been explored by some of the most adventurous philosophers of mathematics. Consider the strange fact that mathematical truths seem to be discovered rather than invented. When mathematicians work out the implications of certain axioms, they often find structures and relationships that surprise them, that seem to have their own independent existence. The mathematician G.H. Hardy famously wrote that he felt like an explorer in a strange country, discovering mathematical landscapes that were already there waiting to be found. This suggests that mathematical structures might have a kind of existence that transcends human minds, not physical existence, but something more fundamental, logical existence. Perhaps this is what provides the foundation for all other forms of existence. Perhaps what existed before time began was pure logical structure, not thoughts in a cosmic mind, but the abstract relationships and patterns that make coherent thought possible at all. This logical realm wouldn't be empty or static. It would be teeming with potential, rich with unexplored implications, pregnant with all the possibilities that could ever be actualized. Every possible universe, every possible timeline, every possible way that existence could unfold would exist as logical possibilities within this abstract realm. But logical possibility by itself seems insufficient to account for the richness of actual experience. Why should some possibilities be actualized, while others remain merely potential? What determines which logical structures get expressed as physical reality? Here we encounter what philosophers call the selection problem, the question of what selects certain possibilities for actualization while leaving others as mere abstractions. And it's here that consciousness might play a more fundamental role than we've previously imagined. Consider the measurement problem in quantum mechanics from a new angle. When a quantum system is observed, its wave function collapses from a superposition of all possible states into a single actual state. But what if this process isn't limited to quantum systems? What if the entire universe is constantly collapsing from logical possibility into actual reality through some cosmic process of observation? This wouldn't require a conscious observer in any anthropomorphic sense. It might be that the capacity for registration, for differences to make a difference, for information to be meaningful rather than arbitrary, is what allows logical possibilities to crystallize into actual existence. From this perspective, what existed before time began might have been pure potential, not the potential for specific things to happen, but the potential for potentiality itself, the abstract capacity for possibilities to become actualities, for logical structures to express themselves as experiential reality. But this leads us to perhaps the most profound question of all. What is the relationship between logical structure and conscious experience? How does abstract mathematical relationship give rise to the felt quality of existence, the warmth of sunlight, the taste of water, the peculiar sense of being someone rather than no one? This is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness, and it might be the key to understanding what existed before time began. If consciousness is somehow fundamental to reality rather than emergent from it, then perhaps the realm that preceded time was something like pure awareness, not personal consciousness with thoughts and memories, but awareness as the basic capacity for there to be something. It's like to be something. This fundamental awareness wouldn't exist in time because it would be what allows temporal experience to be experienced rather than just logically structured. It wouldn't exist in space because it would be what allows spatial relationships to be registered rather than just formally defined. It wouldn't be material because it would be what allows matter to matter rather than just exist as abstract pattern. Yet even this approach to fundamental consciousness leaves us with the deepest mystery of all. Why should there be any capacity for experience at all? Why should the universe be structured in such a way that there can be something it's like to be part of it? Perhaps this question marks the absolute boundary of what finite minds can comprehend. We can push our understanding to the very edge of the conceivable. We can construct theories and models and mathematical frameworks, but at some point, we seem to encounter what can only be called the sheer givenness of existence, the irreducible fact that there is something rather than nothing. But maybe that's exactly as it should be. Maybe the mystery isn't a deficiency in our understanding, but a pointer toward the inexhaustible depth of reality itself. The fact that we can ask about what existed before time began, that we can wonder about timeless realms while embedded in time, that we can contemplate the foundations of existence using minds that are themselves expressions of existence. This might be the deepest clue we have to the nature of what we're trying to understand. Every attempt to explain ultimate reality seems to presuppose something even more ultimate. Physical laws presuppose mathematical structures. Mathematical structures presuppose logical coherence. Logical coherence presupposes the capacity for meaning. The capacity for meaning presupposes something capable of recognizing meaning, and that recognition seems to require something very much like consciousness. We find ourselves in a strange loop where every explanation leads back to the mystery of consciousness, and consciousness leads back to the mystery of existence, and existence leads back to the mystery of why there's anything at all. It's not a vicious circle, it's more like a spiral that deepens with each turn, revealing new layers of wonder with each revolution. Perhaps this spiral structure is itself a clue to the nature of ultimate reality. Perhaps existence is fundamentally self-referential, self-creating, self-exploring. Perhaps what existed before time began wasn't a static condition, but a dynamic process of reality coming to know itself. Existence exploring its own infinite possibilities through the medium of consciousness and time. This would make our inquiry into the nature of ultimate reality not just an academic exercise, but a participation in reality's ongoing self-discovery. When we wonder about what existed before time began, we're not external observers trying to peer into a mystery that has nothing to do with us. We're expressions of the mystery itself, reality investigating its own deepest nature through the questions that conscious beings are capable of asking. The recursive quality of this investigation consciousness, studying consciousness, existence exploring existence, might be the closest we can come to understanding what transcends temporal boundaries altogether. Not through finding a final answer that closes off all further inquiry, but through recognizing that the capacity to ask ultimate questions is itself a manifestation of whatever ultimate reality is. In this light, the mystery of what existed before time began becomes not a problem to be solved, but a doorway to be entered. Each question we ask opens onto deeper questions. Each insight reveals new territories of wonder. Each attempt at understanding deepens our appreciation for the inexhaustible richness of existence itself. And perhaps that's the most profound realization we can reach. The question and the questioner are part of the same reality. When we ask what existed before time began, we're not standing outside existence looking in, we're existence looking at itself. reality exploring its own deepest nature through the questions that only conscious beings can formulate. This doesn't diminish the mystery, it amplifies it. It suggests that consciousness isn't an accident in an unconscious universe, but a fundamental feature of reality's exploration of its own possibilities. Every moment of genuine wonder becomes a kind of cosmic event, a moment when existence becomes conscious of its own extraordinary nature. The ancient philosophers spoke of wonder as the beginning of wisdom, but perhaps they didn't go far enough. Perhaps wonder isn't just the beginning of wisdom. Perhaps wonder is wisdom recognizing its own source in the inexhaustible mystery of existence itself. When you lie awake at night pondering these ultimate questions, when you feel that peculiar vertigo that comes from contemplating the foundations of reality, when you're struck by the improbable fact of your own consciousness in these moments, you're not just having thoughts about existence, your existence having thoughts about itself, the universe becoming conscious of its own mysterious nature through the questions that only conscious beings can ask. And in that recognition, perhaps we find something approaching an answer to our ultimate question. What existed before time began? Perhaps it was this very capacity for wonder, for questioning, for conscious exploration of mystery, not as personal attributes of individual minds, but as fundamental features of reality itself, waiting to express themselves through the evolution of consciousness in time. The mystery remains as deep as ever, but it's no longer external to us. We are the mystery contemplating itself, existence exploring its own inexhaustible nature through the questions that conscious beings are compelled to ask. And in that ongoing exploration, reality continues to discover new dimensions of its own infinite possibility. What if the deepest truth about reality is that it doesn't need to exist at all, yet somehow chooses to? This brings us to perhaps the most unsettling insight of our entire journey, the radical contingency of everything we take for granted. Every law of physics, every mathematical relationship, every logical principle that seems so solid and dependable, all of it rests on foundations that themselves seem to float in an ocean of pure possibility. Consider the fundamental constants that govern our universe: the speed of light, the strength of gravity, the mass of an electron. These values appear to be finely tuned with extraordinary precision, as if reality had to thread the needle of an impossibly narrow range of possibilities to allow for the existence of stars, planets, chemistry, life, and consciousness. Change any of these constants by even a tiny amount, and the universe becomes a very different place, perhaps one where complexity never emerges at all. But here's what's truly staggering. There seems to be no necessity that these constants should have the values they do. They're not derivable from some deeper logical principle. They appear to be, in the technical sense, arbitrary. The universe could have been configured in countless other ways, with different physical laws, different possibilities for structure and pattern. This arbitrariness extends all the way down to the most basic level. Why should there be 3 dimensions of space rather than 4 or 17? Why should time flow forward rather than backward? Why should there be something we call causation at all rather than just random chaos? Every attempt to ground these features in something more fundamental seems to encounter the same pattern. The foundations themselves rest on choices that could have been made differently. Yet here we are, in a universe that not only permits but actively generates the kind of complexity that can ask questions about its own existence. We find ourselves in a reality that's not just comprehensible to rational thought, but seems almost designed to reward curiosity, to reveal deeper patterns to those who look carefully enough. This leads us to what might be the most profound paradox in all of existence. The universe appears to be both utterly contingent and remarkably coherent. It didn't have to exist, yet it does. It didn't have to be rational, yet it is. It didn't have to give rise to consciousness, yet here we are, wondering about our own improbable presence. Some thinkers have suggested that this very improbability points towards something beyond the realm of natural explanation. If the odds against a universe like ours are astronomical, perhaps its existence requires some kind of selecting principle, something that chooses this particular configuration of possibilities from the infinite array of alternatives. But what could serve as such a selecting principle? Here we encounter ideas that push the boundaries of both science and philosophy. One possibility is that consciousness itself plays this selecting role, not the personal consciousness you experience as yourself, but consciousness as a fundamental feature of reality, the universe's capacity to register and respond to information. In this view, what existed before time began might have been something like pure choosiness, not someone making choices, but the abstract capacity for selection itself. The fundamental tendency for reality to actualize some possibilities rather than others, to crystallize certain patterns from the infinite ocean of potential. This choosiness wouldn't operate through deliberation or planning in any sense we'd recognize. It would be more like a basic tendency of existence towards certain kinds of order, certain patterns of organization that allow for increasing complexity and eventually consciousness itself. Reality would have what we might call a bias toward interestingness, a fundamental inclination to explore possibilities that lead somewhere rather than nowhere. But even this notion of cosmic choosiness leaves us with deeper questions. What determines which possibilities are selected? Is there some cosmic aesthetic principle at work? Some fundamental sense of beauty or elegance that guides the selection process? Or is it something more like trial and error on an unimaginable scale, with reality constantly experimenting with different configurations until it hits upon combinations that can sustain themselves? These questions lead us into territory that borders on the mystical, yet emerges naturally from our most rigorous scientific thinking. Consider what physicists call the anthropic principle, the observation that the universe appears to be fine-tuned for the existence of observers like ourselves. One interpretation of this principle is that we shouldn't be surprised to find ourselves in a universe that permits our existence, because if the universe were different, we wouldn't be here to observe it. But there's another interpretation that's far more intriguing. Perhaps the universe is fine-tuned for consciousness, because consciousness plays a fundamental role in the existence of the universe itself. Perhaps observer and observed are more intimately connected than we've imagined, not through some mystical influence, but through the basic structure of reality itself. This brings us back to the quantum measurement problem, but now viewed from an entirely new angle. If consciousness genuinely plays a role in collapsing quantum possibilities into definite realities, then perhaps this role extends all the way back to the foundations of existence. Perhaps what existed before time began was the universe's own capacity for self-observation, the cosmic potential for reality to become aware of its own nature. This wouldn't be consciousness as we experience it, the stream of thoughts and sensations that constitute personal awareness. It would be something much more fundamental, the basic capacity for registration, for information to make a difference, for patterns to be recognized rather than simply existing as meaningless arrangement. From this perspective, the emergence of conscious beings like ourselves wouldn't be an accident in an unconscious universe. It would be the universe's method of exploring its own possibilities, reality's way of coming to know itself through the questions that only conscious beings can ask. But let's step back from these speculative heights and consider another possibility entirely. What if we've been thinking about this whole question in the wrong way? What if asking what existed before time began is like asking what's north of the North Pole, not because it's too difficult to answer, but because the question itself rests on assumptions that don't apply to the territory we're trying to explore? Consider this carefully. When we ask what existed before time began, we're still thinking in terms of temporal sequence. We imagine some state or condition that preceded the beginning of time. But what if temporality itself isn't fundamental to existence? What if time is more like a perspective, a way that certain kinds of beings experience a reality that's actually timeless at its deepest level? This possibility draws support from some unexpected quarters. In Einstein's relativity, the distinction between past, present, and future becomes relative to the observer. From the perspective of a photon traveling at the speed of light, there is no temporal passage at all. Departure and arrival are simultaneous. The entire journey happens in a single eternal instant. Now imagine extending this insight to the ultimate scale, perhaps what we call the universe, with its 13.8 billion years of cosmic history, its evolution from simplicity to complexity, its long journey from the Big Bang to the present moment. Perhaps all of this exists simultaneously in some higher dimensional reality, like a vast sculpture that we can only perceive one slice at a time. From this perspective, asking what existed before time began is like asking what existed before the first page of a book. The question assumes that the book unfolds sequentially, but the complete book exists as a whole, with all pages simultaneously present. Similarly, the complete timeline of reality might exist as an eternal structure, with what we call temporal flow being simply our way of experiencing this timeless totality. But if reality is fundamentally timeless, what accounts for our experience of temporal passage? Why do we feel like we're moving through time rather than simply existing within it? Here we encounter one of the deepest mysteries of consciousness, the phenomenon philosophers call the specious present, the fact that our experience always seems to have temporal thickness, to encompass not just a single instant, but a flowing duration. Perhaps this temporal thickness of consciousness is itself a clue to the nature of ultimate reality. Maybe consciousness doesn't exist within time, so much as time exists within consciousness, not personal consciousness, but consciousness as the fundamental capacity for there to be an experiential dimension to reality at all. This would make the flow of time not an objective feature of the universe, but a subjective feature of the way consciousness engages with timeless reality. From this perspective, what existed before time began would be the same thing that exists now, a timeless realm of possibility that consciousness experiences sequentially, like reading a book or listening to a symphony. But even this timeless view of reality raises profound questions. If everything that ever happens or could happen exists simultaneously in some eternal structure, what accounts for the apparent direction of time? Why do we experience causes preceding effects, rather than effects preceding causes? Why does entropy increase rather than decrease? Why do we remember the past but not the future? These questions point towards something that might seem paradoxical. Even if reality is fundamentally timeless, it might still have an intrinsic orientation, a built-in directionality that gives rise to our experience of temporal flow. This directionality wouldn't be temporal in the ordinary sense. It wouldn't involve one moment following another. Instead, it might be something more like a logical ordering, a sequence of implication rather than a sequence of events. Think of it like this. In a mathematical proof, the conclusions follow from the premises not in time, but in logical space. The relationship between axioms and theorems is one of implication rather than causation. Yet this logical ordering gives the proof a definite direction, a clear sense of what comes before and what comes after. Perhaps the apparent flow of time reflects a similar kind of logical ordering in the structure of reality itself. What we experience as the past might be the logically simpler states, while what we experience as the future might be the logically more complex states. The arrow of time might be the arrow of increasing logical sophistication, reality exploring increasingly complex implications of its own fundamental structure. This would make consciousness not just an observer of this logical unfolding, but an active participant in it. Every moment of awareness, every recognition of pattern, every formulation of a new question would be reality exploring new dimensions of its own logical possibility. Consciousness wouldn't be separate from the structure it's trying to understand. it would be one of the ways that structure comes to know itself. From this perspective, our inquiry into what existed before time began takes on a completely different character. We're not external investigators trying to solve a puzzle that has nothing to do with us. We're reality investigating its own foundations, existence exploring its own deepest nature through the questions that conscious beings are capable of formulating. This makes every moment of genuine wonder a kind of cosmic event. When you lie awake at night contemplating the mystery of existence, when you feel that peculiar vertigo that comes from thinking about the foundations of reality, when you're struck by the improbable fact of your own consciousness in these moments, you're not just having personal experiences, you're participating in reality's ongoing exploration of its own infinite depth. The questions we ask are not separate from the reality we're questioning. The wonder we feel is not separate from the wonderful nature of existence itself. The consciousness that contemplates the mystery of consciousness is itself part of that mystery, one of the ways the mystery becomes conscious of its own inexhaustible richness. This recursive quality mystery, investigating mystery, wondering about wonder, might be the deepest insight we can reach about what existed before time began. Not a what in any ordinary sense, but the very capacity for questioning itself, the fundamental tendency of reality to explore its own possibilities through the evolution of consciousness. And perhaps that's why this question feels so urgent, so compelling, so strangely familiar, even in its ultimate mysteriousness. We're not trying to solve a puzzle that's foreign to our nature. We're trying to understand the source of our own capacity for understanding, the ground of our own ability to wonder, the foundation of our own participation in the ongoing exploration of what it means for anything to exist at all. The mystery deepens with every step, but it doesn't become more alien. If anything, it becomes more intimate, more personal, more connected to the very core of what we are. We are the mystery contemplating itself, existence exploring its own nature through the questions that only conscious beings can ask. And in that recognition, perhaps we find something approaching an answer to our ultimate question: what existed before time began? Perhaps it was this very capacity for self-exploration, for questioning, for conscious wonder, not as attributes of individual minds, but as fundamental features of reality itself, waiting to express themselves through the evolution of consciousness in time. The mystery remains as deep as ever, but it's no longer external to us. We are the mystery, and the mystery is us. And in that strange loop of self-recognition, reality continues to discover new dimensions of its own infinite possibility. What if the deepest truth about what existed before time began isn't something we can think our way to, but something we can only approach through the very act of questioning itself? Perhaps we've been searching for an answer when the real revelation lies in the quality of the search, in the strange fact that finite beings can contemplate infinity, that temporal creatures can wonder about eternity, that conscious minds can reach toward the foundations of consciousness itself. There's something almost miraculous about this capacity for transcendent questioning. You are, right now, using patterns of neural activity that emerged from billions of years of cosmic evolution to contemplate realities that may have preceded that entire evolutionary process. Your thoughts are made of matter and energy, yet they can reach beyond the material realm toward abstract possibilities that seem to exist outside space and time altogether. This reaching beyond itself might be consciousness's most extraordinary feature. Every time you ask a question that pushes against the boundaries of the conceivable, you're demonstrating something profound about the nature of mind itself. Consciousness isn't just a passive mirror reflecting external reality, it's an active participant in reality's exploration of its own depths. Consider what happens in the moment of genuine wonder. You encounter something, perhaps the night sky, perhaps the strange fact of your own existence, perhaps the realization that there might be infinite universes beyond our own, and suddenly, your ordinary sense of scale and significance dissolves. For a brief instant, you feel yourself part of something vastly larger than your individual life. yet intimately connected to the mystery you're contemplating. These moments of wonder might be more than just pleasant experiences. They might be glimpses of a deeper truth about the relationship between consciousness and reality. When you feel awed by the cosmos, you're not separate from what you're contemplating. You're the cosmos contemplating itself through the medium of human awareness. This suggests something remarkable about what might have existed before time began. Perhaps it wasn't a state or condition or entity, but rather the pure potential for this kind of self-contemplation. The abstract possibility that reality could eventually give rise to beings capable of wondering about reality itself, not as an accident or byproduct, but as one of the fundamental tendencies built into the structure of existence. From this perspective, the emergence of consciousness in the universe wasn't an unlikely fluke. It was reality fulfilling one of its deepest possibilities, the potential to become aware of its own nature, to explore its own depths, to ask questions about its own foundations. Every conscious being becomes a unique perspective through which existence can examine itself. But this raises a fascinating paradox. If consciousness is reality's method of self-exploration, then what we call the hard problem of consciousness, the question of how subjective experience arises from objective processes, might be approaching the question backwards. Instead of asking how matter gives rise to consciousness, perhaps we should ask how consciousness gives rise to the experience of being material beings in a material universe. This isn't necessarily idealism in the traditional philosophical sense. It's more like recognizing that the distinction between subjective and objective might itself be a perspective that emerges within consciousness rather than a fundamental feature of reality. The world you experience as external and objective might be consciousness modeling itself in a particular way, creating the experience of being a localized observer in an extended universe. Think about dreams for a moment. In a dream, you experience yourself as a separate being moving through an external world, interacting with other people and objects that seem independent of your own mind. Yet the entire experience, dreamer, dream world, and dream characters is generated by the same underlying consciousness. The apparent separation between observer and observed is a structure within the dream, not a relationship between the dream and something outside it. Perhaps our waking experience has a similar structure. Perhaps what we call the physical universe is consciousness dreaming itself into the experience of being separate from itself, creating the illusion of countless individual minds observing an external reality. From this perspective, asking what existed before time began is like asking what existed before consciousness began, dreaming the dream of being a material universe. But even this consciousness-centered view leaves us with the ultimate mystery. Why should there be any capacity for experience at all? Why should there be something it's like to be something, rather than just mechanical processes operating without any inner dimension? Here we encounter what might be the deepest question of all, not what existed before time began, but why there's any such thing as existence itself. Every attempt to answer this question seems to presuppose what it's trying to explain. If we say existence is necessary, we have to explain what makes it necessary. If we say it's contingent, we have to explain what allows contingent things to be possible. If we say it's self-creating, we have to explain what provides the capacity for self-creation. At every level, explanation seems to require something unexplained. Perhaps this infinite regress isn't a failure of understanding, but a pointer toward the true nature of existence. Perhaps reality is genuinely groundless, not in the sense of being arbitrary or chaotic, but in the sense of being its own ground, its own reason, its own explanation. Perhaps existence exists because existence is the kind of thing that exists by its very nature. This might sound like circular reasoning, but it could be pointing towards something profound. Consider mathematical truths like the fact that 2 + 2 = 4. This isn't true because of some external authority or deeper principle. It's true by virtue of what the symbols mean. The truth is self-evident, self-grounding, requiring no external validation. Perhaps existence is similar. Perhaps the reason there's something rather than nothing is that something is the fundamental nature of reality. Not something as opposed to nothing, but the primordial isness from which all particular things emerge. The basic fact of existence would then be like the basic fact of logical truth not requiring explanation because it provides the foundation for all explanation. But this leads us to an extraordinary conclusion. If existence is self-grounding, if reality is its own reason for being, then consciousness as the dimension of reality that can recognize and appreciate existence participates directly in this self-grounding nature. When you become aware of your own existence, you're not just observing something external, your existence recognizing itself, reality becoming conscious of its own self-grounding nature. This makes every moment of self-awareness a kind of cosmic event. When you recognize that you exist, when you feel the strange certainty of your own being, when you're struck by the simple fact that there's something rather than nothing in these moments, you're not just having personal experiences, your reality celebrating its own existence through the medium of conscious recognition. The ancient philosophers spoke of wonder as the beginning of wisdom, but perhaps they didn't go far enough. Perhaps wonder isn't just the beginning of wisdom. Perhaps wonder is existence recognizing its own mysterious nature, reality marveling at its own capacity to be real. From this perspective, our entire inquiry into what existed before time began takes on a completely different significance. We're not trying to solve an abstract puzzle about cosmic origins. We're participating in reality's ongoing exploration of its own deepest nature. The question arises from the same ground we're trying to understand, and the questioning itself might be the closest we can come to that ground. This doesn't mean we've answered our original question. If anything, we've deepened the mystery beyond anything we could have imagined when we started. But perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Perhaps the deepest truths about existence can't be captured in propositions or theories or explanations. Perhaps they can only be lived, experienced, wondered about. What existed before time began? Perhaps it was wonder itself, not as a psychological state experienced by individual minds, but as a fundamental feature of reality, the cosmos's capacity to be astonished by its own existence. Not wonder about something external, but existence, wondering at its own mysterious capacity to be. This wonder wouldn't be separate from the reality it contemplates. It would be reality in the mode of self-appreciation, existence in the attitude of gratitude toward its own improbable presence. Every moment of genuine amazement at the night sky, at the fact of consciousness, at the simple reality of being anything at all, would be the universe recognizing something extraordinary about its own nature. And perhaps that recognition is what allows reality to continue existing moment by moment, not through some external sustaining force, but through its own ongoing appreciation of its own existence. The universe continuing to choose itself, to affirm its own reality, to say yes to its own presence through the wonder of conscious beings. This makes consciousness not an accidental byproduct of cosmic evolution, but one of the ways reality maintains itself in existence. Every time you feel genuine wonder, every time you're struck by the mystery of being, every time you ask ultimate questions about the nature of existence in these moments, you're participating in the process by which reality sustains itself. The question of what existed before time began may not have an answer in any conventional sense, but asking the question, feeling the wonder that drives the question, participating in the mystery that the question points toward this might be as close as finite beings can come to touching the infinite source from which all questions and answers emerge. And in that touching, that wondering, that questioning, perhaps we find something more valuable than any answer could provide. We find ourselves participating directly in the mystery we're trying to understand. We discover that we're not separate from the reality we're investigating, but expressions of that reality's own capacity for self-exploration. What existed before time began? Perhaps it was this very moment of recognition, the eternal now in which existence becomes aware of its own extraordinary nature through the questions that only conscious beings can ask. The mystery deepens with every question, but it doesn't become more foreign. If anything, it becomes more intimate, more personal, more connected to the very heart of what we are. So here we find ourselves at the end of our journey through the deepest question ever asked, yet somehow we've arrived at a place that feels more like a beginning than an ending. We started by asking what existed before time began, and in a sense, we've discovered that the question itself might be the most profound answer we can reach. Think about the extraordinary fact that you've just spent this time contemplating realms beyond time, using thoughts that emerge from matter to explore possibilities that might transcend matter entirely. Your brain, made of atoms forged in ancient stars, has been reaching toward concepts that might have existed before those stars were even possible. There's something almost absurdly beautiful about finite beings contemplating infinity, temporal creatures wondering about eternity. But perhaps that's not absurd at all. Perhaps that's exactly what reality has been working toward all along, the emergence of beings capable of asking questions that push against the very boundaries of existence itself. Every time you feel that peculiar vertigo that comes from thinking about ultimate things, you're experiencing something profound, consciousness bumping up against its own foundations. We've explored quantum vacuums and eternal inflation, mathematical universes and timeless awareness, the recursive loops of consciousness investigating itself. We've discovered that every answer seems to require something even more fundamental to explain it, leading us into ever deeper mysteries. But maybe that infinite regress isn't a bug in our understanding. Maybe it's a feature of reality itself. Consider what we've actually accomplished in this exploration. We've used minds made of matter and energy to contemplate realms that might exist outside space and time altogether. We've employed logic to examine the foundations of logic, consciousness to investigate consciousness, existence to explore the mystery of existence itself. This isn't just impressive, it's miraculous in the most literal sense of the word. The fact that you can lie in bed tonight and think about what might have existed before the universe began, the fact that you can feel wonder at your own capacity for wonder, the fact that you can ask why there's anything at all rather than nothing, this itself might be the deepest clue we have to the nature of ultimate reality. Perhaps what existed before time began wasn't a state waiting to become something else, but the eternal possibility of moments exactly like this, one moments when existence becomes conscious of its own extraordinary nature. Every time you feel genuine amazement, every time you're struck by the mystery of being, you might be participating in something that transcends time entirely. This doesn't mean we should stop asking questions or exploring the frontiers of physics and cosmology. If anything, it means those explorations are even more important than we imagined. Every discovery about the nature of reality, every new theory about cosmic origins, every insight into the relationship between mind and matter, all of this is reality coming to know itself more deeply. We are the universe's way of looking at itself and asking, how is this possible? Why am I here? What does it all mean? And the fact that these questions feel urgent and important to us might be the best evidence we have that they're woven into the very fabric of what is. So when you close your eyes tonight, when you feel yourself drifting towards sleep, remember that you carry within you the capacity to contemplate the deepest mysteries existence has to offer. You are made of star stuff, but you're also made of question stuff, wonder stuff, the strange substance of consciousness that allows the cosmos to ponder its own nature. What existed before time began? Perhaps it was the eternal possibility of this very moment, the possibility that reality could eventually give rise to beings capable of loving existence enough to wonder about its deepest secrets. The possibility that the universe could become conscious of its own extraordinary nature through minds like yours. The mystery remains as deep as ever, but you're no longer separate from it. You are the mystery contemplating itself, existence exploring its own infinite depths through the questions that only conscious beings can formulate. And in that recognition, perhaps we found something even better than an answer. We found our place in the grand story of being itself. Thank you for taking this journey with me into the deepest waters of existence. If you found yourself moved by these ideas, if you felt that strange joy that comes from touching the edges of the infinite, please consider sharing this exploration with others who might appreciate the mystery as much as you do. And as always, I'd love to hear from you. What questions arose for you during this journey? What moments of wonder did you experience? Drop a comment and let me know there's something beautifully fitting about continuing this conversation about timeless mysteries across the very temporal medium of the internet. Sweet dreams, fellow wanderer. May your rest be peaceful, and may your dreams be filled with the quiet recognition that you are part of something far more extraordinary than words can ever capture. You are existence celebrating its own mysterious presence, and that, perhaps, is the most wonderful thing of all.